Hi, this is Carmela from Group 8, and on the discussion of environmental ethics, I'm here to report Peter Singer's The Environment. Singer introduces this chapter with a hypothetical situation in which a decision maker is conflicted between whether building a dam in a river valley or not. He identifies the advantages to bee employment and energy production, while the disadvantages are mainly to the environment, which are damage to landscape, wildlife, and recreational activities. So he is now conflicted between economic development and wilderness preservation. The singer's goal is to scrutinize societal attitudes toward the natural world, while also focusing on the conflicting values that arise in controversies over wilderness preservation. So sit tight, because it's going to be confusing. Let's first examine the Western tradition, which is a combination of the Hebrews and the Greek traditions. So starting with the Hebrews through the Bible, so based on the biblical story of creation in Genesis, human beings were granted dominion over the fish in the sea. So this word dominion was interpreted by some Christians as stewardship, which is a directive to look after other living things rather than to do whatever we will. However, there is a lack of textual support for this, especially after God drowned almost every other animal on earth to punish human beings for their wickedness, as we already know in Noah's story. And then after the flood, God repeated this grant of dominion of human beings over other living things. Also, Augustine pointed out that in some instances, Jesus himself showed indifference towards both plants and animals to teach us that avoiding the killing of animals and destruction of plants is actually extremely superstitious. So second, based on the Greek tradition, which is mostly Aristotle, he says that those with less reasoning ability exist for the sake of those with more, which are us. And then St. Thomas Aquinas followed this with the thought that you can only sin against God, yourself, or your neighbors. Here, there is no recognition that you can possibly sin against non-human animals or the natural world. From these two thoughts, we can definitely say that the dominant Western tradition possesses an anthropocentric worldview, or that human beings are put at the center of the moral universe, and the natural world exists for the benefit of human beings. So, in this case, how can we ever justify the preservation of nature? Well, the answer is easy. Yes, we can justify it, but only if we can provide strong arguments for how this can benefit the human well-being, because after all, this is a human-centered ethic. And this also begs the question, what about future generation? We can think about them too, because they are still human beings. There are also more reasons to preserve the nature. Now, picture that you are about to cut down a virgin forest. You know that the economic gains of this are employment and profits, but these are only short term. Like, even if the purpose is to generate electricity, this would only be used for a few generations before it gets replaced with newer technology. However, if we do cut down a virgin forest, which is a link to our past, this connection with the past is lost forever. So we have a burden to carry that every succeeding generation on this planet will have to endure. And it is why environmentalists rightly consider wilderness as a world heritage, or an inheritance from our ancestors that we must safeguard for our descendants to have any access to it. So cutting down the virgin forest means that this link is done permanently. However, our culture has difficulty in looking at long-term benefits. In the same way that politicians never worry about what happens after their term, or in economics, all future goods are discounted. We just see little to no value in whatever we may gain in a distant future. For example, if we anticipate that we're willing to pay $1 million in 200 years for an unspoiled valley, and considering a 5% annual discount rate because future goods are discounted, the surprising answer is that today's profit from cutting down a non-regrowing forest would only need to be $60 to justify the loss of $1 million in 2210. However, we know that wilderness is timeless and priceless because even if we do cut down a forest and plant a new one, it's not the same anymore. So applying a discount rate is flawed, and some things, when lost, cannot ever be regained by any amount of money. So we can't justify the destruction of an ancient forest for substantial export income, even if it has potential investment returns. And we can never restore the irreplaceable link with the past that is represented by this virgin forest. However, this doesn't rule out justifying cutting virgin forests, but it emphasizes the need for any justification to fully account for the forest's value, to consider both the immediate and distant future generations. Because as true wilderness diminishes, every remaining part becomes more significant due to the scarcity of opportunities to experience it. We can't be so sure that the future generations will also appreciate nature because right now we are so uh, addicted to mobile games, video games, that we rarely go out into nature. But surprisingly, there is a rising appreciation for the wilderness, especially among countries that are overcoming poverty. It is appreciated for its beauty, scientific potential, recreational opportunities, and the desire for something untouched by modern civilization. So these places are more advanced, more modern than the rest, the mga first world country probably. And this is saying that we always want what we can't have. So there's that. But this appreciation for wilderness beauty is also criticized by many because are you only appreciating nature for merely aesthetic? So this reason is also downplayed as merely aesthetic, but isn't that the same reason why we appreciate art pieces exhibited in museums such as the Louvre or the Met? So to Singer, his aesthetic senses are most stirred in nature, and his highest form of aesthetic appreciation allows him to reach a spiritual intensity. One more thing is that if we preserve today's wilderness, we give the future generations an option or a chance to experience a world that is untouched by human hands. If you do so, this choice is lost forever. And even if their interest in nature is uncertain, in the future, we should still safeguard wilderness so that we avoid repeating the past's thoughtless actions that deprived us of witnessing extinct species like the dodo, the stellar sea cow, and the thylacine. So we should not subject future generations to these irreplaceable losses that we have already experienced. And all these points that I have stated show that actually human-centered ethics can still support compelling arguments for environmental values. But this doesn't suggest prioritizing economic growth over wilderness preservation. And on the topic of speciesism, you also must not confine ourselves to a solely human-centered ethic. So we must address other challenges to rethink the traditional Western approach to environmental issues. So we must venture outside humans. And so this begs the question, is there value beyond sentient beings? So for as a review, sentient yung beings who are able to feel, to have senses, so many humans, animals, but what about like grass, plants? So now we have established that limiting intrinsic value to humans is arbitrary. And if we value the human conscious experiences, there's also value in the experiences of non-human beings, right? So this raises a question that does it apply only to sentient beings, or does it extend beyond the boundaries of sentience? As a recap, intrinsic value means that something is good or desirable in itself, in contrast to instrumental value, which means that it has a purpose towards another end. And in this case, Singer also considers the application of utilitarianism to the dam situation. He notes that utilitarians will still account for the loss inflicted by death on non-human animals, or the forfeiture of the entire future existence and experiences of whether pain or pleasure, even if it is considered less significant compared to a human's death. But since there are thousands, if not millions, of animals involved, it is very difficult to calculate the pleasures and pains through utilitarianism, so it's now almost absurd. But this doesn't diminish the significance of considering the loss of future animal lives in our decision-making process, because you want to extend to other sentient beings or even non-sentient beings. So, should we care about more than just individual suffering and death and consider the possible extinction of entire species or the loss of ancient trees in the valley? How important is it to preserve animals, species, trees, and the overall ecosystem, regardless of human interests like economics or recreation? So this raises a fundamental moral question about what we should include in our ethical considerations. Now, let's explore arguments that support the idea of expanding ethics beyond just sentient beings. And Singer actually has a question for this, which is, once we abandon the interests of sentient creatures as our source of value, where do we find value? What is good or bad for non-sentient creatures, and why does it matter? It's a tough question to answer. So there are people who attempt to theorize or contribute ideas as to how we might treat other beings. So the first one is Nobel Prize awardee Albert Schweitzer, who says that life has an inherent will to live, seeking more life and experiencing pleasure and pain. One must have reverence for all life, treating it as sacred. So Schweitzer includes all living things, whether sentient or non-sentient. So he is often quoted for his phrase reverence for life. As for him, a truly ethical person helps sustain life and avoids causing harm to any living thing, regardless of its perceived value or capacity to feel. He emphasizes on cherishing and preserving life and avoiding actions that check or destroy it. And similar to this, Paul Taylor's argument says that every living thing is pursuing its own good in its own way, and we see ourselves in them, leading us to value their existence as much as our own. So to Paul Taylor, we are equal as other living beings because we see ourselves in them. However, Singer himself criticizes both Schweitzer and Taylor for their use of metaphorical language, such as seeking more life or pursuing its own good, for example, because you cannot really picture a plant seeking life or pursuing it's a more sentient trait to seek or to pursue, right? So plants don't have the capacity to seek, yearn, or pursue water or sunlight because these beings are not conscious. And he compares this to a river pursuing its own good or a guided missile's good being to hit its target. So it's misleading for Schweitzer to use such metaphors to advocate for an ethic of reverence for all life when plants don't even experience these emotions. And an objection to this criticism by Singer is by Holmes Rolston, who says that natural selection endows organisms with traits valuable for survival, and this allows them to value based on these traits. To him, organisms are actually valuing entities, even if they are non-sentient, and this attributes to traits stored in their genes. However, he wasn't able to clarify why natural selection leads to a valuing while human design does not, which raises question about the notion of a non-sentient valuer, which is really questionable. Um, to Ralston also, if I may add, while a missile hitting our target may be good for its operators, it is not beneficial for the missile itself because it is only designed for a specific purpose. But doesn't apply to the plant because natural selection applies to the plant, which makes a plant a valuing entity. And so living things and human-designed machines can be explained physically and without consciousness. And there's no clear reason to favor living processes over non-living ones. We know that for sure. And therefore, there's no obvious basis for showing more reverence to a tree than a stalactite, or a single-celled organism than a mountain. Sorry. So we venture to deep ecology, which preserves biosphere that encompasses both living and non-living things, integrities, intrinsically beyond human benefits. So this indicates that there is also shallow ecology. Shallow ecology means refers to what we're doing right now, where we show traditional morality that focuses on avoiding pollution and also to preserve wilderness for the sake of recreational enjoyment. But deep ecology goes beyond that as it really preserves biosphere beyond human benefits. Beyond human benefits. Okay, I think that's the key term. So this perspective has inspired further development of deep ecology by various writers. The first one I call this new ethic was Aldo Leopold because some 60 years ago he wanted a new ethic, and we now call land ethic, to expand the moral community to include the land, animals, and plants, to be inclusive even to non-sentient living things. And he says that a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong when it tends otherwise. And so, to further develop this deep ecology, Arnes and George Session developed principles for deep ecology, which are the following. First one is the well-being and flourishing of human and non-human life on Earth have value in themselves, so they have intrinsic or inherent value, and these values are independent of the usefulness of the non-human world for human purposes. The next one is the richness and diversity of life forms contribute to the realization of these values and are also values in themselves. Last one is that humans have no right to reduce this richness and diversity except to satisfy vital needs. And so, to Australians, and so Bill Deval and George Session also introduces the biocentric egalitarianism, or treating other living things as your equal, in which they say all living things in the biosphere are considered equally valuable, which with each having the right to thrive and express itself within the interconnected whole of nature. So we can recall this on Paul Taylor's statement that we see ourselves in other living things, and so we treat them equally. Richard Sylvan and Val Plumwood also extended this thought towards non-living things, saying that you should not jeopardize the well-being of natural objects or systems without good reason. Next, we have Lawrence Johnson and Freya Matthews on the concept of holism, or treating living things as part of a whole, in which they suggested to consider the interests of entire species or ecosystems alongside individual interests in moral deliberations. Matthews extended this perspective to the entire global system, and this aligns with James Lovelock's concept of Gaia, defending a version of biocentric egalitarianism. Now we have an even bigger question that is, can a species or ecosystem be seen as having interests or self to realize? Even if it is possible, it encounters challenges as it needs to demonstrate that these entities possess morally significant interests, independent of their role in sustaining conscious life. And in discussing the ethic of reverence for life, we found that determining the moral significance of an interest involves understanding the experience of having that interest unsatisfied. And this inquiry makes sense for sentient beings, but not for trees, species, or ecosystems. And while the biosphere may resemble a self-maintaining system, it doesn't imply conscious desire for self-preservation. And using mythological names like Gaia for the global ecosystem may not enhance our understanding. That is according to Singer. And unlike sentient beings, trees and ecosystems lack the capacity for feelings. Therefore, the divide between sentient and non-sentient creatures provide a more robust basis for a morally important boundary than distinctions between living and non-living things or holistic and non-holistic entities. And so rejecting the ethical foundation of deep ecology doesn't weaken the case for preserving wilderness. To clarify, it simply highlights the challenges of arguing for intrinsic value in plants, species, or ecosystems. And unless a more secure foundation is found, focusing on interests of sentient beings, both present and future, human and non-human, provides sufficient grounds. So in a society where wilderness destruction isn't necessary for survival needs, the value of preserving significant wilderness areas far outweighs the economic gains from their destruction. So now we focus only on the sentient beings as part of our environmental ethic. Now, in developing an environmental ethic, there are actually three steps outlined by Singer. The first one is prioritize the interests of all sentient beings, including future generations. This appreciates the beauty of untouched nature, or in urban context, it discourages large families, challenging outdated beliefs. And unlike materialistic ideas, it values personal development over consumerism and emphasizes fulfillment. Frugality and reuse are encouraged to minimize our environmental impact, and this ethic aligns with green consumer practices aimed at saving the planet. The next one is to redefine your extravagance in ecological terms. So an environmental ethic prompts us to redefine it beyond luxury items. Or let's say timber sourced from rainforests is extravagant because we consider the rainforest's enduring value compared to timber uses. And disposable paper becomes extravagant when ancient hardwood forests are converted for wood chip production. Motorsports are deemed extravagant due to alternatives that don't rely on fossil fuels, and so on. And the last one is to value pleasure in meaningful ways. Because during the Second World War in Britain, fuel-saving posters asks, "Is your journey really necessary?" And similar restraint is crucial for our environment, even if the threat is less visible. The call to reduce unnecessary level and consumption remains vital. And an environmental ethic doesn't oppose pleasure, but values it in meaningful ways. That is through loving relationships, close connections, eco-friendly activities, ethical food choices, creative work, and mindful appreciation of unspoiled places in the world. That's all. Thank you.